So I have been playing a lot of games on my Nintendo Switch 2, specifically games that are supposed to be looking and running better on the system compared to the Nintendo Switch 1. And I have 3 games right here that I ended up playing a lot onto my system, and I want to talk about each one into this video. But before we jump into that, I have to ask, by the time this video comes out, it is officially my birthday. And the only thing I am asking for my birthday is for you to be watching and subscribing to the channel if you haven't already. We're trying to hit 21,000 subscribers by the end of the month. We're pretty close to it. I feel like we can pull it off. If not, that's okay. Without further ado, let's start talking Nintendo Switch 2 games. First up is an exciting one, and that is The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild. Now, obviously this game was a launch title for the Nintendo Switch 1, so it's so fitting to see it come out again for the Nintendo Switch 2. And I remember playing Breath of the Wild on my Switch 1 thinking, wow, this is a phenomenal game. Everything about this is so incredible. And I was starting to think to myself, how do they make the game better on a different platform? And then I started thinking about the times that there was frame rate dips and stuff like that. And I was like, wow, the Nintendo Switch 2 hardware could really fix a lot of these problems with some of the games that was on Switch 1. And Nintendo knew exactly what they were doing with the Switch 2, because one of the first things that they showed off is the fact that Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom was getting Switch 2 editions to where it was going to fix all the problems people had complaints. And I was like, ooh, this is exciting. I immediately put the game in and I couldn't believe how fast it loaded. I know they talked about how fast it was going to be loading in, but it was literally in seconds. I wasn't expecting that with Breath of the Wild, and it was so cool to see. The visual updates that they did to Breath of the Wild is also so fitting to its art style. I felt that the way that they handled the Breath of the Wild on Switch 1 and how it looked, the art style, all that was perfect. And I was curious to see how the Switch 2 was going to adapt to that. And it does. It improves everything and makes the visuals so much fitting with its art style. This truly was the perfect way to see this game. It's honestly really cool to see what Nintendo did with these versions, because it shows the technical aspect of it and shows what Nintendo could be doing to these Switch 1 games. And honestly, I think it's also exciting to see for future things that are happening for the Switch 2 when it comes to from Nintendo, whether it's games or them updating their games. And they really went all out with Breath of the Wild. Now, obviously, I had to test the frame rate. I'm sure y'all have seen clips of the Switch 1 playing Breath of the Wild and how you can really do some crazy things in the game to have the frame rate go all over the place. And there's one particular area as well that was really weird to see the Switch 1 go crazy with the frame rate, and that was Korok Forest. And obviously, I went to Korok Forest, and the game did not once drop a frame. It was staying locked at that 60 frames per second, which made the area so much better to go through. That was honestly the most confusing thing to see happen with the Switch 1, and I'm surprised Nintendo released the game like that, because the frame rate got really crazy in that area, and it was crazy enough to have, because it's just not something you would see from a Nintendo game. But that was all fixed here, and I obviously did the crazy, insane things to see how the game would work frame rate wise, and it still remained at that locked frame rate, which I was heavily impressed and glad to see Nintendo do something about this. Now, there really isn't any new type of content into this game. The only thing that Nintendo was hyping up with the announcement of it was if you had the Nintendo Switch app on your phone, there would be an additional app called the Zelda Notes, which the Zelda Notes app is going to connect to both Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom and do all sorts of things. It can track when you're using Amiibo, what Amiibo you have used. It tracks where you've been, where you're wanting to go, and also has a GPS, which I thought was kind of interesting. It essentially shows you all the shrines that you have not done, and I don't know really if I like that feature. I thought it was different, but it also, the UI wise, was kind of all over the place, because it shows you every shrine and it doesn't show you if you've completed them or not. So it was a little all over the place. The map, it just did not look right with that. But the thing that I thought was the most interesting thing about the Zelda Notes app is that it actually has new voice dialogue with Zelda. And Zelda basically goes through a history of Hyrule talking about certain things into the game. I think there was like 100 new dialogue clips that's into this app, which I thought was very interesting and cool to see, because I thought Patricia Somerset, that's the voice of Zelda, did such a great job voicing her. And I thought it was cool to see her return to do more dialogue. The only thing about this is you had to find the items through the app. So like you would connect the app to the game, you'd be exploring Hyrule, the tracker would go off, and then once you go to that area that it's going off at, it would immediately start the new dialogue on the phone. The only thing that I'm a little upset about when it comes to this is that this at some point is going to be lost media, because it actually is not connected to the game. The audio that you're getting comes from the phone. So this new Zelda dialogue, like 20, 30 years from now, is gonna be gone. And I wish that Nintendo would have somehow included that to the base game, maybe somehow put Zelda notes into the actual Switch game rather than having to use a phone. I thought that was a little weird direction, and kind of reminds me that we're going back in time with the Switch 1 when Nintendo was forcing that app for the voice chat, which was absolutely crazy. Especially with some of the dialogue that's said in this, I feel like really opens the door to a lot of people speculating a lot of the things with Hyrule and the world that is in Breath of the Wild, Tears of the Kingdom, all that stuff. And it's just going to be interesting to see that at one point this will be gone. And obviously, I guess you can find YouTube videos on it. It's just, I don't know, kind of weird. There was another thing that I actually have to point out that I was wrong about, that Coleman tried to tell me that, Max, there's no way they're going to include this. And I was very surprised. Now, to me, this makes sense that they wouldn't include it if you already owned the game, or if you're doing one of the $10 upgrades, because you don't have to buy this game physically. If you own the game already for Switch 1, you can do a $10 upgrade and get the Switch 2 edition digitally. Or if you're an NSO expansion pack member, you actually get the upgrade for free. And one of the things that happened with it is obviously Zelda has DLC. And I thought for sure, with the fact that they were charging $70 for this brand new physical copy, that it was going to come with the DLC, because this is basically the definitive way to play Breath of the Wild. And even with the physical copy of this, you still have to pay for the DLC, which I thought was very surprising, and I didn't think there was any possible way that Nintendo was going to do that. I would say that was also a little bit of a disappointing feature regarding this. And Coleman, you were right. The last thing that I'll talk about when it comes to this game is it also offers an additional save file, which is crazy that we're gassing up a game for having the option to have 2 save files, because that kind of sounds crazy that that's a thing, that we have to beg for that, that there's only 1 save file. Like, I remember the Pokemon games having that. I'm like, bro, this is crazy. I got so pumped to the fact that they did that, because now I'm able to start a new playthrough of this game without having to worry about all the stuff that I did on my other version of it. And it's been cool to play through this game again, with seeing all the visual updates, the 4K, the 60 frames per second, all of that. I greatly enjoyed this, and I definitely think it is worth the money if you have never bought this game before or played it, anything like that. Definitely play it on the Nintendo Switch 2. Let's change things up a little bit. Let's talk about Sonic Shadow Generation. Now, this is one that got announced, I think it was like the first thing in the month of May, that Sega announced that they had another title coming out for the launch day of the Nintendo Switch 2. And we were all like, oh wow, this could be a really big deal. And then it was found out that that other game coming out was going to be Sonic Shadow Generations, which I don't know if you guys have followed the videos on this channel. I was kind of confused why Sega was doing this, as Sonic Shadow Generations on the Nintendo Switch 1, I felt was a pretty much perfect way to play the game. If you've looked at these 3D Sonic games on Nintendo Switch, all of them have frame rate issues, crashing issues, doesn't work well with the Switch, all sorts of things, pop in, so many things. But Sonic Shadow Generations on the Switch 1 didn't have any of that. It was always at a locked frame rate, visually looked great, all of it was amazing. And I talked very highly of the Switch port. That's actually why I have a signed copy right here. I thought this was one of the best third-party games out there for the Nintendo Switch in terms of how it was developed. I was heavily impressed with it. So when they announced the Nintendo Switch 2 edition, I was a little confused, because what more could they have done other than a better frame rate? And even then, having the better frame rate, I didn't think it was gonna make that big of a difference to me, if I'm honest. And immediately as I put on the game, I did the 60 frames per second mode. And yes, it visually looked great. It looked better than what it did on Switch 1. The frame rate was better, but then I was still leaving to myself with, what is the point of this if I already owned the Switch 1 edition? I had a fun time replaying these levels, seeing the visual difference, as it was a difference, but I don't feel like it was a big jump in difference, if that makes sense. But with that being said, I definitely played around with the settings and had a fun time doing the 60 frames per second mode, as I thought it was interesting that Sega came out with 2 editions of the game. There's a performance mode, and then there's a quality mode. Performance mode is at 60 frames per second, but here's the crazy thing that is probably gonna throw a lot of y'all off guard, because it threw me off guard. Performance mode is at 720p. What? What has Sega done? How? What? I don't even know. Normally, stuff like this would be at 1080p, but no, Sega, I don't even know, man. Truly, that had me speechless. I'm still speechless at this point telling you this, because I don't even know how you justify that, how they even made that be a thing in the development, because that just doesn't seem possible. But if you want performance mode, be ready to be at 720p. Quality mode was absolutely phenomenal as well. Definitely from a visual standpoint, it was way better to play it on that mode, in my opinion. I like 60 FPS, but it was just so weird seeing that at 720p, if I'm to be honest with you. I also thought it was interesting to point out that they weren't able to do shadow generations at this different frame rate options on the PlayStation 4 Pro and Xbox One X, but the Nintendo Switch 2 was able to pull it off. I guess there's more to this game than we realize when it comes to the graphical side of it, since those versions can't handle it, but it definitely still throws me off seeing that. Another thing that Sega did that I thought was really questionable with this was the fact that they announced that if you already owned the Nintendo Switch 1 edition of this game, they would not be giving people the option to upgrade. You would have to buy the game flat out all over again. They said that your save data would carry over, but in terms of an upgrade option, that would not be an option. And I thought that that was very, very disappointing, considering that we're seeing so many people give this option, such as like No Man's Sky, for example, Hogwarts Legacy. Actually, No Man's Sky is just flat out giving you the Switch 2 edition for free if you already own the game. You know, we just talked about Zelda, how if you're an NSO member, you get it for free, or you can pay $10 if you don't have that. Sega wants you to flat out pay another $50 onto this game, which I thought was a very interesting choice and a very poor choice from Sega. Ultimately, with everything that I played with this game, I feel like if you already own the Switch 1 edition of this game, there's really no point in buying the Switch 2 edition. Yes, it visually looks better, but I still feel that the Switch 1 edition of that game is a very good version of Sonic Generations out there. The only time I would say maybe look into this is if you could somehow find a sell for this for maybe under $20, which will probably happen at some point. And the last one that we're talking about today is obviously The Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom. Man, when I played Tears of the Kingdom on my Nintendo Switch 1, I obviously noticed the issues with the game being on Switch 1. The frame rate was at times kind of all over the place. I definitely felt that it was at a standpoint where Nintendo probably wasn't happy with how the game looked from a frame rate perspective, but the game was meant for Switch 1 hardware and they utilized it at its absolute limits. So when they announced Tears of the Kingdom for Switch 2, I was like, whoa, this might be the perfect game to have out there for the system. And once again, I immediately put the cartridge in. Everything was loading faster. And then I actually have not finished Tears of the Kingdom. I can explain why it was not finished. I was so locked into finishing the game to get a video review that I think I just played it so much that I just was not in the mood to play it. And now that I'm playing it again on my Switch 2, I'm back in the Tears of the Kingdom mode, enjoying this game so much. And it's given me the opportunity to see this game with its frame rate difference, because I noticed all the issues with the Switch 1 version, and as I put this game in, played it all over again, I'm noticing all of the amazing added details to where there's no frame rate dips at all, which I think is absolutely stunning. Visually as well, it's the same thing that I said with Breath of the Wild. I feel like the art style already looked phenomenal on Switch 1, but they took it with these updated visuals and the art style just looks so much better, and it just fits with what they're doing with these games. I really loved what they got going with this. The only thing that I noticed with Tears of the Kingdom compared to Breath of the Wild is I did notice that there was some pop-in still an issue into the game. When I was far away from something and I was starting to slowly walk up to it, I saw it slowly disappearing and then added back just how pop-in would work. But it wasn't too noticeable. It's only noticeable for me because I pay attention to these things because of what we do on this channel, talking about how things run, you know, look better, visual, frame rate, all that stuff. So I feel like for the natural eye, you guys would not notice the things that I was noticing with it. And it was honestly very rare when I saw this happen. I would say it only happened maybe 2 times as I played through Tears of the Kingdom. Once again, Zelda Notes app, still a feature within this. New voice dialogue that I, again, worry about how's this gonna work for the future. I really wish they could have put this into the actual game rather than using an app, because there's some really interesting dialogue in there. Ultimately, it is an incredible version of the game, and it really shows that the Nintendo Switch 2 is the best way to play these games, especially Tears of the Kingdom. I don't necessarily feel that Breath of the Wild was that bad on Switch 1. It was just a few things that was like, oh wow, that's interesting. And then Tears of the Kingdom uses the same engine and then takes it further, so then you notice these issues way more. And they really utilize the Nintendo Switch 2 heavily for these games, and it goes to show, and it's something that I definitely highly recommend you guys picking up. In fact, I'm going to go finish playing Tears of the Kingdom now because I am having such an absolute blast playing this on my Nintendo Switch 2. But guys, I definitely want to hear your thoughts on these versions of the games. Did you pick them up? Are you going to pick them up? What's your thoughts on the Sonic Switch 2 thing? I thought there was some interesting moves from Sega with that one. Ultimately, it's just going to be one of those things. But guys, I have been talking for way too much. Make sure to backslash that subscribe button, like the video, check out the Twitter, check out the Instagram, Discord, P.O. Box, all that stuff in the description below, and I will see you guys in the next video. Peace. And thank you for the birthday wishes. Well, I'm assuming there's going to be people saying happy birthday in the comments, but I guess there's a good possibility that there's going to be that one comment that just talks about the video rather than saying happy birthday, which would then make this part of the video awkward if somebody already commented and then they noticed that I talked about how there might be a comment that doesn't talk about saying happy birthday. So I'm just making this further awkward. I should probably just go and hit the end record button now, probably. Yeah.